everybody, welcome back. Baking for me is such a great way to relax, and it helps me so much during times of stress because you get to transform ingredients that are just flour and sugar into something that looks stunning and that is so tasty and satisfying. And today I'm going to help you to make a plum tart. It's kind of a pie with some pastry cream, beautiful plums on top, which are in season right now. I hope you love it. Now, a great tip whenever you're baking is to begin with the 2 steps that you can just get out of the way, and that way you'll never forget to do it. Preheat your oven. Today we're preheating at 410 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 210 Celsius, and we're gonna prepare a pan. I'm using a small 9-inch pie plate, and I'm just gonna grab a little bit of non-dairy butter and wipe it with a paper towel. Make sure you get all of the sides, and we're also gonna dust with a bit of flour. I'm gonna be using my food processor today. Making pie dough in the food processor is so fast and so easy, but if you don't have one, please still make this recipe. There is no mandatory need to use it. You can just use your hands and combine everything together. Now, I'm gonna teach you a secret when it comes to making perfect pie crust. The secret is that you need really cold ingredients, especially when it comes to the butter that we're gonna add to that flour. Same thing goes for the water. Take water right from the fridge. Why? Because when that pie hits the heat in the oven, it's the contrast in that temperature that's going to create those flaky pockets that we love in pie dough. So if you want a flaky pie crust, we want that kind of contrast in temperature. That's also why we always refrigerate doughs before we stretch them out and roll them out and put them on our pie plate. So one secret that I love, especially when it comes to vegan baking, because non-dairy butter is much softer than dairy-based butter, is I like to measure out the amount that I'm going to use, and I like to separate it on a plate, and I pop this in the freezer just while I measure out the rest of my ingredients. It's not gonna freeze the butter, it's just gonna harden it a little bit more, and that way it's gonna be so cold when you mix it in. So the first step is we're going to add our flour. Do this in a bowl. If you don't have the food processor, no problem. We're gonna add some sugar. Always salt. Let's give this an initial pulse just to make sure that that's all really well incorporated. Now I'm just gonna grab my bits of butter and just add them in just different parts of my flour here. We're gonna pulse again, and what we want is a kind of wet sand-like consistency. If you're doing this by hand, just separate and mix with your fingers, with the tips of your fingers. And we don't want this to completely disappear. We want some little bits of butter here and there. That's also gonna help create those pockets. You're gonna start seeing how this already starts coming together into a dough-like consistency. And now we're gonna add some aquafaba. Aquafaba is just that brine that comes in a can of chickpeas with the chickpeas. So you just drain your can of chickpeas or your jar of chickpeas over a colander, and you collect that liquid that comes out. It's kind of this egg-like, it looks like egg whites in a way. And normally pie doughs don't use an egg substitute or eggs, but I like it in this particular dough that I'm making for this particular pie. Also, this is my favorite dough for quiche. So we're just gonna add that in. As you can see, it's this gooey texture, and we're also going to add some water. I always like to add water just a little bit at a time as needed. Now, compared to other pie doughs, this one is gonna be much stickier, and that's what we want. So this isn't gonna form into that usual big ball of dough that we normally have. We're just gonna have a very sticky mixture that simply looks well put together and combined, but very soft and very sticky. I have a bit of plastic wrap here on my workspace, and I'm just gonna add that dough in the center. Don't fuss with it, it's gonna be really sticky. We're gonna be using a little bit more flour when we roll it out. So right now, you're not even gonna touch it. We're just gonna wrap it, form it into a disc with the help of that plastic wrap, and we're gonna pop it in the fridge, refrigerate for 30 minutes. You can also do this the day before. You could even make this dough and freeze it and then simply thaw it outside of the fridge, out of the fridge, and when it's back to that soft texture, you can make your pie. Let's prepare a couple of ingredients that are actually gonna be the last thing you put on your pie before you pop it in the oven at the last stage of the baking process. We're gonna combine some cinnamon and some sugar. I'm using brown sugar today because I love that molassesy taste to this, but if you only have regular sugar, which is what you use for the pie dough and what we're gonna use for the pastry cream, use that, it's totally fine. So we're just gonna combine cinnamon and the sugar together, mix it. And this is just gonna be sprinkled on top of the fruit before we pop it back in the oven. Another thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create a kind of glaze to accent the color of those gorgeous plums. The traditional glaze we put sometimes on top of fruit in fruit tarts is made with, reducing the fruit in the pan and cooking it down. We can cheat and we can use jam. Of course there is plum jam, but what I like to do is I like to use strawberry jam. So I'm just gonna add some strawberry jam to a bowl, add a bit of water. We want this a little bit runnier so that we can brush it on top of the fruit. Now because this is a very sticky dough, keep enough flour on hand. Make sure you're flouring your parchment paper really well and add some to your ball of dough and to your rolling pin. And let's just roll that out. Once it's to the size of your pie plate and the dough can rise up the sides, we're ready to place our pie plate over it and flip. Let's cut off a bit of the excess border. And then we're just gonna pat the edges down just to give them a nicer look. Now we're gonna grab a fork and we're gonna prick little holes all across the bottom. This is going to prevent, those big bubbles that we get sometimes in pie. Just gonna let the steam escape. And now all we have to do is I'm gonna use the same parchment paper I used before and add my pie weights. Pie weights is just a fancy term of saying anything that's gonna weigh this down, usually just some dried beans. Don't use these beans afterwards. You can store them in a jar like I do, and once you've used them a few times and they're kind of crumbling up on you, just toss them and start over. I'm gonna cut the excess parchment paper that I have here to prevent it from burning and creating smoke in the oven, and we're gonna pop this into our preheated oven and bake for 10 minutes. Carefully grab your parchment paper and remove your dried beans. And you're gonna see how this is kind of a little bit golden around the edges. It has puffed up a little bit, but not too much. And now we have that gorgeous base. We're gonna slice our plums and place them in a bowl. Vegan pastry cream is so easy to make. In fact, I think it's a lot easier than non-vegan pastry cream. We're gonna basically be flavoring, sweetening, and thickening some non-dairy milk. So we're going to add with some of the milk we're going to use. I'm gonna add that in a bowl, and then we're gonna add our thickener to form a slurry. Whisk together. We're gonna set this aside and create our pastry cream in a pot on the stove. Whenever you're making a sauce or a cream in a pot, it's always helpful if you can find a pot that has a heavy bottom. That way you won't scorch it in the bottom. And we're just gonna add the rest of our non-dairy milk. I'm using soy milk today. I think it has the perfect consistency. You can use any other type of non-dairy milk as well. We are going to, like I said, sweeten with some sugar and flavor with some vanilla extract. We're gonna whisk that together and bring it to a boil. Whisk it from time to time. And as soon as you see that it starts to bubble, we're gonna add our cornstarch slurry and whisk that always before adding it. Now that you see it growing and bubbling, we're gonna add that slurry in. Whisk constantly. This is gonna thicken really quickly. You're gonna see that it immediately transforms this into a delicious pastry cream. As soon as that happens, turn off the heat, and I'm gonna give you a little trick for a vegan pastry cream. It's optional, but I think it's really, really delicious. We're gonna add a bit of non-dairy butter. It's gonna create a silkier cream when it's finished. Whisk away, and we're gonna immediately transfer it to our pie shell. Now you always wanna leave a bit of a border because we still need to add our fruit. Let this cool slightly just for a few minutes so that these don't jiggle around when you put them on top. And we're gonna layer them really close together so that you see a lot of that skin. We're gonna start on the outside and kind of do a swirl towards the center. We're gonna brush some of that diluted strawberry jam that we had earlier, just to give it some sheen, to add to the sweetness of the fruit and some color. Now we're gonna take our sugar cinnamon mixture and sprinkle on top of the fruit. Now we bake in the oven. After 10 to 12 minutes, your tart or pie will be ready to come out of the oven. You're gonna see that it's bubbling slightly with that jam and that sugar. The plums are nice and tender, and you've got a golden color in the crust all across the edges. You're gonna see that it jiggles again slightly, and this is because we have re-warmed up that pastry cream. So now what you have to do is you have to let this cool completely. Let it cool, then stick it in the refrigerator. Once you see that it doesn't jiggle anymore, we can cut into it and enjoy. Thanks so much for watching today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.